This is going to be the simplest introduction to dependency injection. After watching this video, the topic will just make sense and you'll be using dependency injection almost everywhere in your code. Now, say you have a class that uses a number of other services or classes. For example, this data processor needs 3 other services: a database reader, an emailer, and a logger. Right away, the first definition to note is dependencies. These 3 services or classes needed by the data processor are called dependencies, for the super simple reason that the data processor needs or depends on their functionality. So at this point, we are halfway to defining dependency injection. The next important question is, where should these 3 services be instantiated? Who has the responsibility of creating these 3 services? Should the data processor do the job of directly creating them, or should some other thing do this job? The very simple and straightforward way would be for the data processor to directly create these 3 services. It can instantiate them in the constructor. This code will compile, it will work and do the job, but it's not best practice. A much better implementation would be to have some other thing instantiate these 3 classes and pass them to the data processor. These can be passed through the constructor or method. The act of creating these 3 classes or dependencies is called injection. Hence the full definition, dependency injection. Thus the definition of dependency injection done. This external thing doing the job of instantiating these 3 dependencies and passing them to the data processor is in most cases a DI container. Now a big application will have more than one place where dependencies need to be instantiated and passed into the using class. A DI container has a dedicated job of automatically creating and passing dependencies to not only this data processor, but to all other systems in a class. That is all there is to dependency injection on a high level. This simple definition should not be confusing. There's nothing more to dependency injection than having something else create and pass dependencies. We then move on to a high level question. And what is DI trying to achieve? What is the point of having dependency injection? Why go through the extra trouble if the data processor can simply create or instantiate its own dependencies? Why not just cut out the injection and the DI container? If you are completely new to dependency injection, this is where the confusion might start. The short answer is dependency injection is a very useful tool to achieve a number of software best practices. So for now, let's forget about dependency injection and mention these best practices. First, you must be able to swap out a module for another one. This could be for a number of reasons. For one, there could be many variations of conceptually the same implementation. For example, the database could be SQL or NoSQL, but conceptually you're still doing some database work. This is generally called coding against an abstraction or loose coupling. So in the data processor, making changes should be as easy as possible. Another best coding practice is that code must be easily testable. Example, we want to test some functionality of the data processor. The emailing services must not be sending out thousands of emails to real addresses. It must not be consistently spamming emails if we're still testing. So we want to use a fake or a mock that doesn't actually send out real emails. Another coding best practice is that a class should only be doing one thing. It should only be focused on one responsibility. This is called the single responsibility principle. The data processor must not be responsible for creating these 3 objects or dependencies, because then it becomes responsible for the lifetime or lifespan, and it also becomes a point at which memory of these objects is created. Those other classes would also be instantiating the same objects, creating unnecessary copies. It could be that only one logger is needed across the entire system. Something else must be given the responsibility of managing the lifetime and lifespan of these objects. So dependency injection is a practical way of achieving best practices, and each one is potentially a big standalone topic. Confusion can really creep in because the different topics are usually lumped together. Dependency injection in itself must not be confused with creating everything as an interface just for the sake of testing. In the same way, dependency injection must not be confused with needing to use mocking frameworks for all the testing. Testing is a separate topic, and even within this topic, there are different opinions around the use of mocks. And a DI container is not needed to achieve dependency injection because you can create your own container. This will take you a very long time, and it's best to just use an already existing containers. Stated in a different way, dependency injection is not creating interfaces, it is not testing by using mocks, and it is not a DR container. What is that simple definition again? Dependency injection, a class should not be directly creating instances of dependencies, but instead they should be created by some other entity and passed to the class, typically via the constructor or some method. This is the simple definition of dependency injection.